Hey there, chess lovers. I'm Grandmaster Max Illingworth, and in this video, I'm going to share with you my journey going from having a curiosity in the Trompowsky to it turning into arguably my most powerful surprise weapon, the white pieces. For those of you who are wondering, the Trompowsky arises after the moves d4, knight f6, and now the move bishop to g5, immediately hitting the knight on f6 with the bishop. And you see, my experience in the past was that ever since 2002, when I was 9 years old and then my spark for chess had lit up into a monstrous fire, well, basically back then I was always playing the move c4 as white. That was my repertoire for 6 years, and it got me to a FIDE rank of 250, playing this in nearly all of my games. But then at a certain point when I was working with Grandmaster Ian Rogers, who was definitely the trainers who made the biggest impact for me in going from, a strong expert level to Grandmaster in the end. Well, I noticed that he often played the Trompowsky with white, that he was one of the big experts this opening back when I was having lessons with him. And so it kind of occurred to me, well, if he's being so successful in winning game after game with this opening and just like beating these 2-2-100, 2-200, 2-300 players like they're complete beginners, then it got me thinking, well, if I follow what my coach Ian is doing and I play the same way as him, then I'm probably going to get the same results and beat those players, right? Now, this is a point where some of you might say, oh, but, he's a top Grandmaster, Australia's top player, and, you're just some 250 rated punk. But believe it or not, I actually did manage to replicate Ian's results by following his games. And that taught me something very valuable, which is that if you want to reach a Grandmaster level in any sort of chess skill, the fastest way to do so is to simply model someone who's already got to where you want to be, Grandmaster standard, and then just follow what they do, learn from their experiences, so that you're learning from their mistakes and experiences rather than your own. And of course, on top of that, you're going to learn from your own experiences for even better learning, but that's the little shortcut and the unfair advantage that I'm going to give you here in this training video. Because you see, by learning from my experiences and how I developed my understanding of Trompowsky, it's going to save you many years of trial and error, and will allow you to hit the ground running and already set problems for masters and grandmasters alike. And I mean, if grandmasters struggle against a Trompowsky, then it's sort of given that your club player opponents are going to struggle even more. And you will see many examples of this in this video. So, after knight f6, bishop g5, well, as I mentioned, I was first inspired by Ian Rogers, playing this in some games, but also noticed many other players like Julian Hodgson being another big expert. You could say probably the first big expert of the Trompowsky, where he would just beat these 2-400 and 2-500 players like Grandmaster International Masters in 30 moves or less, like it was absolutely nothing, just make him look like complete beginners. And I was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this. And then finally I was inspired by an international master. At that time he was a FIDE master in Australia, but I noticed he was playing the bishop g5 move in every one of his games in online blitz, and actually getting to a very high blitz rating with it. So, okay, his opponents, even grandmasters, struggling in these lines, so let's play it myself in some of my own tournament games. Yeah, we're just doing a nice long, nice little karaoke session, so I'm going to have a sip of water to refresh my vocal cords while you admire this starting position. Okay, let's get into the actual experiences then. So after bishop g5, I immediately thought, well, okay, what does my opponent play against a Trompowsky? And at the time when I first played a Trompowsky, I had only seen a small number of games by different Australian players like Ian Rogers and the FM from Russia that I mentioned. And then it occurred to me, well, what if my opponent's simply not prepared for it whatsoever? Because I'd seen a game he played earlier in the tournament where he had played quite badly against the Trompowsky in the 2008 Vikings Weekender in Canberra. Or actually technically in Tuggeranong in Canberra. But anyway, after bishop to g5, my opponent tried to play the King's Indian with g6. And I find that to be a surprisingly common move at the club level. The problem is that after bishop takes f6, ef6, that white's up is very straightforward. Where I end up playing g3, and he tried to eventually, after I played my usual kingside developing moves, which you might recognize from systems like the English opening, you'll see that in this kind of pawn structure with the pawn on d5, that I ended up playing to basically prepare the c4 push. So after bishop e6, I played rook c1. And I just ended up getting a very nice game after c4 where I think I remember a bit later, like he didn't play dc4 and at least, managed to trade off the pawns so that his bishops have some nice open diagonals, which is the line I suggested in my notes after the game. But after knight f6 and knight f4, when he played the move queen e7, I know from my own experience playing these positions a lot in blitz and over the board, that if you're able to get this kind of position after cd5, where, you're able to isolate their d-pawn, I mean, obviously black shouldn't be trading his knight and bishop like this, but now you can see the impact that, the pawn on d5 is very weak. I can very easily attack it with my pieces, because we see it there, bishop is not able to attack the pawn, whereas my knight can easily move to attack it. I went on to win that pawn on d5 and win the game pretty convincingly from there. So that was quite a fun example, and, after I was kind of like love at first sight, when we beat a, player, well, okay, it was only rated 1900, but he was kind of an underrated 1900 player. And with such easy win, I thought, okay, I love this Trompowsky, and I'm going to play it in some more games. So if we fast forward ahead to my next game that I played, okay, I'm only showing you the wins to save a bit of time. Then my next opponent said, okay, I like to play the Nimzo Indian and the Queen's Indian and these sort of e6-based systems. So he played the move of e6, at least avoiding the double pawns. But I really enjoyed the fact that after e4 that I was able to just get a very nice space advantage in the center. And I've subsequently moved on to other lines, but in this game I played the old school Hodgson approach of knight c3. And I sort of had this creative idea that I'd learned from a repertoire book. I've read so many Trompowsky books, I've forgotten whether this was from the Peter Wells Trompowsky book or the Nigel Davies Trompowsky book or some other Trompowsky book I had that I've forgotten about. But I sort of picked up this idea that you could play very dynamically and play the move queen d3 and castle long and just go for a very big attack like with c5, e5, f4, knight f3, whereas black has to figure out how to get his pieces out. To my opponent's credit, he actually found the best move here in the move d5 to put a pawn in the center. And probably I should just castle long and sack the f-pawn for an attack. But in the game I played e5 and, well, he ended up putting the queen on e7, which wasn't as good as queen d8. Because now after a3, I was basically able to either win the bishop pair, which makes it hard for him to get into c5, or after the move bishop a5 that my opponent played in the game, well, I ended up playing long castles, and although my opening play was not really the absolute best, I was nonetheless able to get in like f4, knight f3, and kind of get an improved version of a Steinitz French, where the bishop on a5 is not very well placed. And I went on to win this game against an 1894 player, Peter Abbott. So far I was just playing the Trompowsky as kind of a surprise weapon against lower rated players, game out of book. But I show these games because I want you to see how club players really struggle against the Trompowsky, that very few of them have any kind of prepared system against this opening, and therefore they're very likely to make mistakes because they're just not able to play the opening in the same way they can their usual, say, King's Indian or Grunfeld or Nimzo Indian or Benoni or whatever opening it is they like to play against 1d4. So let's continue on to the next game, and I do have 38 games here total, so I will try to get through them somewhat efficiently. So this game against Jason Chan was another one where basically my opponent played this g6 mistake, and the lessons in this game are not too different to ones I showed in the Blizznook game. I mean, the play was a little bit different because he decided to play dc4, but I just found it very easy to play white's position where, I was just able to just put my piece in the center, go b5 to go for a very nice minority attack, which I already kind of knew quite well from playing the Exchange Queen's Gambit Decline, where this is a very standard idea. I was able to kind of adapt that previous experience with d4 to successfully handle similar positions that are arising in the Trompowsky, and I was able to win this game against my 2050 rated opponent in the Sydney International Open 2009, a later game in the same event. And okay, bear in mind I was 250 still, you could say, okay Max, you're expected to beat them anyway. So let's continue on. I mean, as you'll see, my very good score to Trompowsky is somewhat inflated by the fact that I was mostly playing against lower rated players and not so much against players my own rating. But still, you'll see that I use it as a very effective weapon where my lower rated opponents really struggle to deal with it. For example, in a game in the City of Sydney Rapid 2009, which actually was one of the first tournaments I ever won with a perfect score, well, in that game, my opponent played the move c5 instead. But then after bishop takes f6, he didn't know that you should play the move gf6 and try to, get the bishop to a long diagonal. Instead, he played ef6, but then I played the move of d5, which admittedly is not such a great move. I really should have played knight to c3. But in the end, my opponent didn't really handle the position very well. Eventually, I was able to get this very nice position where, his bishops are just very passive where he didn't know that he should fiend carry the bishop after d5. And as a result, I was able to outplay him strategically and win quite a nice game. This was against Ivan Zerdem, who was rated about 2040 at the time of this game. Maybe it was a bit high rate on Rapid, but, same idea. So let me show you then the next game I played, where this was one against 1843 player Alan Setiabudi. And it's kind of funny, it's a nice coincidence that each time I'm showing this game, my opponent played a different second move. So I can very quickly show you a very simple repertoire, with my journey of playing this opening, where after d4, knight f6, bishop g5. Well, this time my opponent actually played the best move in the position of the move d5. I find that at a club level, a move like d5 is one you're probably not going to face quite as often as, say, at the professional level. And the reason is because if you're going to play d5 as a club player, it's very, very likely that you would have played on the first move. Whereas if you're playing knight f6 at the club level, you're probably intending some e6-based system or some g6-based system. So that's one reason why you might see those moves a bit more often in comparison against players who are not well prepared, which is nearly all of the opponents in my experience. So nowadays I tend to favour the approaches where you sort of delay bishop f6 and play it more like a kind of improved torre attack. After knight d2 you don't have to worry about knight e4 harassing the bishop, for example. That's why I call it an improved torre. But in this game I was still playing like the old school approach that Hodgson mostly liked to play, where you go bishop takes f6 and you just double their pawns. And yeah, you do give up the bishop pair, but on the other hand, their structure gets worse. Especially after gf6, it's much harder for black to castle the king to safety, because now, they have the doubled pawns around the king. But at the same time, they're probably not going to castle long either. So they have this kind of problem to solve. In the game, I sort of played it like Hodgson. Okay, Hodgson likes to play with c4 immediately, but I went e3 and then I played the move c4 after that, very much in the Hodgson spirit. And you can see that after d takes c4 and bishop c4, you can see that my opponent really didn't understand this position very well. Because if he did, he would have played cd4 and played for very fast pressure against my isolated pawn on d4. And immediately that approach would allow black to equalise with best play. We should be honest and say that even with an opening as miraculous as a Trompowsky, that black will still equalise very cleanly if he plays good moves. This is modern opening theory. On the other hand, by getting the opponent in a position that they're very unlikely to know as early as move 2, especially let's say below the 2400 level, I would say maybe below the 2500 level, it certainly maximises our chance of getting a good position out of the opening by getting in a position where we are comfortable, where we know the key, very simple basic ideas, and where the opponent has to come with completely new plans to balance the chances. In this game, my opponent played e6 and, trying to shut this diagonal, and, I really should have played d5 and just crashed through in the centre. But even playing it a little bit imprecisely, I was still able to get a very good position, where after knight c6 and knight c3, he kind of played a little bit too slowly, and in the end I was able to eventually figure out that d5 is the plan I should go for, and that factor allowed me to get a very comfortable win, despite slightly botching the opening. So anyway, that was my game in the 2009 New South Wales Open, and I'm going to show you two more games as well that I played in the 2009 Gold Coast Open. And that time was actually a bit of a breakthrough tournament for me, because I just had played a very bad Oceania Zonal just before that. I lost a lot of FIDE rating points. You could say it was a very stressful and difficult time in my life. I remember it was a time where, and this is not an excuse of course, but I remember there was this uncertainty in my family where, my mum was getting much worse vision, and we didn't know it at the time, but she actually had, wet macular degeneration and, actually lost all of the central vision in her, one of her eyes, while, I was playing this tournament. So it was quite tough, but in the end, the adversity kind of made me stronger, and actually I was able to bring out my very best in this Gold Coast Open that I wasn't capable of achieving at the time in the Oceania Zonal, or more precise, I didn't play to my capability in that event. So in this game, I was in the first round, and I was playing against a 1730 player. And okay, of course, the idea of showing this, one thing you'll find is that, probably you've studied a lot of classic games, and you've found, okay, you really get a lot of value from studying, how Capablanca or Steinitz or Morphy or some other old master beat their opponents. And the reason it's so instructive to study those games is because basically they're mostly playing much weaker players than themselves. And so you see exactly what they're aiming for, exactly what mistakes the opponent played and how to punish those mistakes, and of course how to avoid the mistakes as well. And a little hack for your training is that when you study games where there's a big rating difference between the players, then that has a similar benefit to studying the games of the old masters. So yeah, you were seeing me beat players who was considerably stronger than at the time of the game. But that way you also see how to punish their mistakes, and you see exactly what white is aiming for when white plays a Trompowsky in these different variations. So I show it for instructional value rather than to try to make myself look good, if that makes sense. So okay, let me share with you this game I played against Sebastian Joule in round 1 of Gold Coast Open. And to Sebastian's credit, he actually knew the first few moves of Fury with the Trompowsky as black, where he knew that the main line was to play knight e4, attacking the bishop. This is the most common move, but to let you in on a little secret, it's actually a bit imprecise. And in my analysis and play to Trompowsky, I actually have shown that white is indeed a little bit better in this position if he plays it in the best way. So I played the move bishop to a4, just getting out of the attack on the knight. And then he played the move c5, again the most common. But what you'll notice with knight e4 is that after f3, the knight is forced back. So while the knight is moved back and forth, we now gain some somewhat useful moves. And after queen a5, c3, and knight f6, later I realized that the best move for white is actually to play d5 in this position. But I want to show you that even by playing a move that is, let's say, not quite as good objectively, I was still able to get a very good position out of the opening. And for those of you who love endgames, you might like this line with knight d2. Because after cd4, the idea is that after knight b3, I exploit the weak position of the queen. I was kind of in love with this line a little bit back when I was first playing the Trompowsky in 2008, before I improved the repertoire even more over time. So my opponent played the move queen b6, and now after queen takes d4, he probably should just play the move of knight c6, because even though the pawns get doubled, he ends up getting quite good counterplay with his central majority in return. But my opponent kind of didn't know the theory at this point, and after the move queen d4, this is a very natural move, but it's quite imprecise, because after c takes d4, I kind of get this much improved version of an exchange Slav in the game, where after rook c1, knight c6, and e3, and we can see that white's bishop is very well placed, and the knight is actually better on b3 than on c3, because later I'm going to have knight c5 to exert pressure on the queen side with my pieces. And then after e6, well, okay, probably in this position I played a little bit imprecisely, like knight c5 and king f2 is probably the correct plan. But in the end I went bishop b5, and still even not playing the absolute best move, I was still able to get an advantage here. Bishop b4 is a little bit imprecise, because I kind of want to play king f2 anyway. And in this arising position, you'll see here that after throwing in some useful moves and then, jumping in with knight c5 to take the initiative. Okay, knight c5 wasn't absolutely the most precise, but even so, after bishop takes and rook c5, you see that white has a clear advantage, because I have this very powerful pressure along the c file that will only increase after later b4, b5. I also have the very powerful bishop pair, and my minor pieces are a lot more active. When you combine it with the fact that I can also advance on the king side with my pawns as well as the queen side, we can say that white is clearly better, and indeed I did go on to win from this position pretty convincingly in the end. So you can see that one of the beauties of the Trompowsky is that even though it is a very creative system by white, it's also quite flexible. Like, there are usually quite a few different ways you can play it, from like taking the knight on f6 and doubling their pawns, or play kind of more like an improved torre, where you can often benefit from not having played the move knight g to f3, or even sometimes transpose into favourable queen's gambit or other types of structures. So, to show you an example of the favourable queen's gambit you can transpose into, or perhaps also called a favourable London, depending on your perspective, I'd like to share with you a game I played in round 3 of this Gold Coast Open, where actually this was a tournament where I remember finishing in equal second place on 5.5 out of 7, with some IMs and even a Grandmaster. Actually, I was leading the tournament outright on 5.5 out of 6, because I had, beaten a couple of international masters in the event, with the white pieces. But okay, then I was playing Grandmaster Gawain Jones in the last round. He's really like a 2.560 rated player. And, he just outplayed me in that game and deservedly won the tournament. But still, leading the tournament, won round 4 to finish outright, was certainly a very good feeling that gave me a great deal of confidence and, reminded me of this journey towards becoming a Grandmaster. Whatever it takes was a worthwhile pursuit after all, though I was seeing results from my work. So anyway, with that sort of heartfelt story out of the way, let me share with you my win against an 1872 rated player, Matthew Jashinsky. So there was d4, knight f6, bishop to g5. And so he played the move bishop knight e4, but then after bishop f4, he then played the move of d5. And this move is trying to be more solid than the more dynamic c5. But a problem we see for black in this line is that, again, after e3, the knight is going to become a target, and after moves like bishop d3 or knight d2, I will be able to trade off this knight and either get a lead in development or double their pawns to damage their pawn structure, neither of which is an ideal outcome for black. Obviously, I talk about this quite a bit more in Play to Trompowsky, but for now, let me share with you the way that the game played out, because it was really very instructive. Because, I mean, the move bishop f5, historically, it's not as common as the move c5, but I've noticed it's a very popular move in club level, where if a club player doesn't really know the theory, they'll often revert to some kind of solid scheme of development like a London or Slav or Queen's Gambit approach that they've seen before. And so we see that here, where after f3, black played the move knight f6, and then after c4, he played the move of c6, which is a quite common move, but also quite passive, where now after knight c3, we kind of have, you could say, an improved version of a Jababa prey attack, because in a Jababa prey attack, you have this position, but with the pawns on c2 and c7. But here, of course, a very important distinction is that my knight on c3 is not blockading the pawn on c2. I get that pressure against the d5 pawn. Whereas here, black would really want to play c5 and pressure my center later. And here it would take him an extra tempo. So here, I played the move queen b3. Admittedly, at the time I played this game, I was not familiar with the idea of going g4 and h4 and h5 and, harassing their bishop time after time. However, I was still able to get a much better position because after my opponent's move queen b6, which might seem like a very natural move to just, challenge the queen in this way, although admittedly b6 was probably a better attempt to hold, even though it looks quite weakening. Because after queen b6, I was able to go c5. And the reason this transformation of structure is so powerful is that we can see that black has no way to stop the b4, b5 break to attack as close to the base of black's pawn chain as possible. You see, after knight bd7 and b4, if my opponent plays the move a6 in this position, then white can even play the move b5 at this point. Arguably, it's probably even more precise to flick in g4 and, chase their bishop a bit first. But I mean, at some point, you are going to play b5, though, before they can break the pin. And now we see the point that either the a6 pawn is collapsing, or if black plays cb5, I can take back either way. I kind of like knight b5 personally, because you have knight c7, and you can also penetrate with knight d6 to this monster outpost. So it's clear that black is just in massive trouble, that already the computer is claiming that white is winning, with black not really making any obviously stupid moves. On the other hand, in the game after bishop to e7, to my credit, I did throw in the move g4, which I'm quite proud of. And after bishop g6 and b5, I mean, black is already in big trouble, but I want to show you how I actually converted to the win just quickly. Because I've found that I've had a lot of games against club players and even against some experts where they fall into this, including in Blitz. They can even beat Naim and a GM with this in the London system. We're after castles. The problem with castles, and I guess with black's position in general, is that after b takes c6 and bc6, now the black position basically falls apart, where I now played the move of bishop to a6, and we see here that there is simply no good defense to bishop b7 and then picking up the c6 pawn after the rook moves away from the attack. My opponent in desperation tried e5 to try and change the trend of the game, but after d5, knight e8 and b4, I was still a pawn up, and black still has to think about how to deal with the bishop b7 threat, since of course rook b8, e6 is a little embarrassing for black here. And indeed I went on to win this game pretty easily. Okay, I've shared with you a lot of good games. It's sort of weird actually that I didn't play the Trompowsky again until 2013, despite the fact that I had very good results with it. I mean, if you found that sometimes that, you play a line and you do really well with it, but then somehow life gets in the way and you sort of totally forgot what you won with before. I mean, it's one reason why every now and then it can be actually good for your confidence to look back at the times when you actually played your best chess, because you might then be able to reverse engineer and say, okay, what are the things I did when I was playing my best? And then you can apply those same things to potentially get out of a slump, or simply to play to your full capability as much as possible. Use yourself as a role model in a sense. So that's a nice little hack for you there. And yeah, as I said, I could show you a lot more of my games, but I'll just tell you a bit about my results where, I basically performed at over 90% in my tournament play with the Trompowsky. So obviously very nice results. And although these games I showed you here were mostly against much lower rated players, I also have used this line to beat some quite strong players like an international master, a grandmaster, And I also used it to beat like another international master as well in over-the-board games. And I also have been very successful with it in online blitz as well, where, for example, I've beaten like quite a few Grandmasters and many international masters as well with the Trompowsky, and you can find it in my chess.com games under my username Illingworth. Of course, like for those of you who do buy it, of course, play the Trompowsky, I will include all of the games I've played with Trompowsky in a special database so that you can learn from my games and also see how I won from some of these games, as well as like seeing how I handled the opening in the typical middle game positions. Like I said, if you learn from my experience, it'll be much faster than if you just play the line on your own without that sort of Grandmaster guidance to accelerate your journey. So speaking of play the Trompowsky, this is where I get to the part where, you know, for those of you who are watching this, you know, who've already bought play the Trompowsky, you know, this is the end of the training. But for those of you who have yet to invest this is why I want to share with you this special opportunity. You know, I think you'll agree that you got a lot of value out of this and that it was very insightful to see how easy it is to outplay players rated between 1800 and 2050 using the Trompowsky, right? I mean, back when I played, it's like I was rated 2250, so it's not like I was, you know, already a Grandmaster when I was beating these players. You know, I was still a good player, but not, let's say, like a world-class player at this point. So it means if I could do it at a 2250 level, and if you can just model my example, then I think you can agree that it'll also be quite easy for you to apply these same ideas, you know, following my example, to also win games against these opponents that you're facing, right? Awesome, great for you. And so this is how you can access the opportunity, because in the Play the Trompowsky course, I actually present more than just how to play the Trompowsky, but I actually present to you a complete repertoire for white. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. Basically, in this repertoire, I show you not just how to play Trompowsky based on my own games, my own research as a top chess theoretician, and also showing you how Julian Hodgson won game after game. You know, I mentioned before how Julian Hodgson was crushing these Grandmaster and International Master in 30 moves or less time after time with a Trompowsky, but actually then explain the games and actually show the thought process of how he actually won the games and how you can apply those ideas for yourself. Because I think Hodgson's kind of like a very old school player. You know, he retired from chess in about 2004, so a lot of the younger generation don't really know of him as a player, except maybe some of the players who are very familiar with the English chess erudition of, you know, the different generations, because Hodgson is one of the older generation of players. But most players are not going to be at all familiar with Hodgson's games. So like this kind of like beautiful creative attacking way he plays is going to completely bamboozle and overwhelm your opponents, which I can say from my own experience as well as the experience of Hodgson and other modern experts who are playing the Trompowsky successfully, where I can mention names like Shakhyar Mamedyarov, Jan-Christoph Duda, Richard Rapport, Badur Jabava. You know, these names are like kind of the most creative, you know, brilliant minds. And, you know, maybe you've watched their game and said to yourself, gee, there's players so creative and brilliant, like fighting so hard for initiative. You know, they might think I can never play like that. But by studying this course and seeing how to creatively attack, you will actually be able to play like these players and be able to overwhelm and just control the game against your opponents the way that they do. So that's a really valuable skill that you're going to get from Play the Trompowsky. You know, it goes beyond mastering the opening and playing the opening like a Grandmaster. I also teach you how to play the key middle game positions like a Grandmaster as well, and how to actually beat your opponents in games, just like I've shown you in this training video. And not only that, but to complete the repertoire, I also present to you a complete repertoire against d5 based on the Queen's Gambit with c4. And the beauty of this is that, you know, rather than, let's say, having to open up a 400-page book to, you know, learn an opening, and then by the time you finish book, you forgot what you've studied in chapter 1, I'm sure you relate to that frustration of, like, studying and feeling like you're wasting your time, or, you know, that you could be doing it much better. Well, in Play the Trompowsky, I actually have a 13-minute quick overview video with which you can have a complete repertoire with the Trompowsky and already start playing it successfully. Same problems for strong players and club players alike in your own games. And I also show you how to play the Queen's Gambit like a Grandmaster in a less than 1 hour video. So again, rather than studying a whole 400-page plus book, you know, on how to play the Queen's Gambit as white, it's I just say, okay, watch a 1 hour video, and then you can start playing this line. I know the line better than your opponents, even if they are like Grandmasters in many cases, because I've actually tested this repertoire in my games with white and shown how even some quite strong GMs really struggle against these sort of tricky, unpleasant lines. In fact, to let you in on a little secret, actually, the lines I present in this repertoire for white are the same lines that I've struggled against a lot in my own games with the black pieces. where some of these lines I've just lost game after game and just felt very frustrated. You know, kind of like, what am I doing wrong? You're like, so frustrated. It's hard for me to say the word frustrated, you know. But, okay. But basically you can see then that, you know, if I struggle a lot to deal with the lines in this repertoire, then it means that your opponents, let's say the lesser models, will not have much hope in dealing with the practical problems set by this variation. And in fact, also, I complete the repertoire by also showing you how to deal with the alternatives to d5 and knight f6. So I show you how to deal with things like the Dutch, you know, the French, or I should say 1e6 to be precise, how to deal with the Perk and the modern. Also show you how to deal with unusual tries like c5 and, you know, knight c6 and b6 and these other kind of rare options. So you can make sure that all the important moves are covered so that you are prepared for what pretty much any serious try the opponent throws at you. And because I show very clear systems, it'll be very easy for you to adapt and to apply the ideas I show you in the many model games that I have in the database as a PGN that you can access when you invest in Play to Trompowsky and this complete 1d4 white repertoire. So yeah, basically that's it. With the model games I present, kind of in this style, and also many unannotated games that you can study in your own time, that will allow you to get the necessary mastery of the positions, to know how you should play from the point where I say white is a bit better or white has good practical chances from this position. So you're covered on all of your bases. And okay, let me share with you now the special offer, what's going to make this truly irresistible and magical for you and transform the way that you play with the white pieces, maybe even for the rest of your life. So basically, you can now, if you're watching this video before Thursday, the 19th of November 2020, then you have the opportunity to access this whole complete d4 repertoire, play the Trompowsky, play the Queen's Gambit, beating other first moves against d4. Well, you can now access all of these for just $27. So for just $27, you get instant access to, this complete d4 repertoire for white based on my Grandmaster experience and explanation and advice. So my satisfaction guarantee to you is that I am so confident you're going to absolutely love this white repertoire and this video course that if you are not 100% satisfied with this, then just let me know within the first 14 days and I will give you a complete 100% refund, no questions asked. So I'm the one taking all the risk here for you because I know that my stuff works, that it's very powerful, that it does win games even very comfortably against club players, experts and masters alike, as I've proven in my own games, as I'm sure you'll also get to show with your own games once you start learning this system and testing it out in your own games. So with that being said, if you are watching this after the 19th of November, after Thursday, 9th of November 2020, then the price is going to be somewhat higher at $47. Still an absolute bargain, because I may have even added some extra training videos since I recorded this video. But certainly, yeah, this is a special opportunity for you to get in now, to get that instant access to play the Trompowsky and the other parts of this complete d4 repertoire with the Queen's Gambit and beating the other first moves that black can play. So to finish, I just want to share with you a very nice testimonial where if I'd been really smart, I would have had it ready right away. But sometimes you come up with the brilliant idea in in midair, as it were. So just bear with me for 1 second as I find this. I can promise you it is worth the wait here. Okay, so I have found the review, and also I will be sharing with you the link in the just below this video as well. You might be watching this perhaps on YouTube or on a blog or somewhere else, but you will see the link in the comments below to access the full course, in case you haven't got it already. So basically, this is a review from National Master Frederick Ryan, who is actually also a very strong correspondence player in the US. And this is what he said about my Queen's Gambit video, the 1 hour training of how to play the Queen's Gambit white repertoire, which comes with this Play to Trompowsky course. He says, in this quick and dirty introduction to the Queen's Gambit, GM Max Illingworth does something I would have thought impossible. In less than an hour, he teaches the reader how to handle every reasonable response to the Queen's Gambit. This includes both black's offbeat responses, knight c6. I'll just set up the position here just so you can understand it. So in this position, he says that this includes both black's offbeat responses to knight c6, to knight f6, 2 c5 and 2 bishop f5, and the most respectable and theoretically critical lines 2 e6, 2 c6, and 2 d takes c4. Max focuses on lines that give white a small and relatively risk-free edge without having to wade through theoretical labyrinths. His repertoire provides plenty of food for thought, not only for Queen's Gambit neophytes, but also for more experienced players who will find responses to tricky lines like the Tarrasch and the triangle variation that are effective, less explored, and more annoying to the opponent than the main lines. Highly recommended and an incredible bargain. Actually, while I read that out, I also realized something where, I said that the Play Trompowsky course is $27, and actually I should say, with the checkout that you'll see, it's actually for the, you'll see Play the Queen's Gambit, so that's the Queen's Gambit section that you can access for just $7 until Thursday the 19th of November. If you're watching after this date, the price will have increased to $17. Still an absolute bargain, but not quite as big a bargain, let's say. But if you get in now, you can get it for $7. And then the extra Play the Trompowsky and how to beat Black's other first moves will be an additional $27. So to correct myself from before, the full course will be simply $34 total. I know $27 sounds better because it has a 7 at the end, but okay, $34 is still an absolute bargain when you consider the value that you'll be able to, employ this repertoire for the rest of your life. Set problems, a lot of problems for club players, experts, and masters alike. You can see even Grandmasters struggle a lot in the lines that I show you, where I show you many, many model games in the PGN file of how Grandmasters have lost, even very strong Grandmasters have lost against the repertoire that I present here. So yeah, I'm really excited to have you on board. Just make sure to click the link below. And once you click that link, just fill in your payment details. It's all explained in the, in the video I've included there. So yeah, just click on the link below to access Play the Trompowsky and its complete 1d4 right repertoire. And I will see you on the inside, chess improvers.